large parts of the Near East, of the Gulf area and so on, are also playing politics there and supporting Islamists. So I think the conflict would be maintained purposely as a strategic device to continue the support.
Margaret Brown is the widow of Major Brown, the commandant of South Waziristan militia in the 1940s. Mrs. Brown now lives in Scotland.
He went to the Scouts. He was commissioned in Bangalore his British regiment was the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, and he went to Bangalore where he was commissioned into the 12th Frontier Force regiment, and was very quickly sent to the South Waziristan Scouts. He always talked about how much he enjoyed it. He was a countryman, and being in that sort of country, which he likened in a small way to the Highlands of Scotland, although he did say the Highlands weren't quite as bleak as Waziristan, but it was to his taste. He was at home there. In '57 on the honeymoon, we were on the way to Jandola, and we were coming up to a nullah, and there was a sudden spate, and oh dear, what do we do now? So the officer came to ask Willie for his instructions, and Willie said, well, get the first lorry across, and the lady wife can go in the first lorry and wait over there. And then the men were to carry the car across, and he said, deploy so many men round, you see. And I thought this was terribly over the top. I thought, oh crikey. So I'm sitting in the lorry while they're struggling to get the car across, and the men are like this. And suddenly I was aware that our circle of men was surrounded by another circle of men. Oh dear. Oh crikey. Now what? Maybe he wasn't trying to impress me. Anyway, I sort of cowered down, and eventually the car was across. Then the other lorry came across, and suddenly there was a lot of shooting, firing. And I thought I could see the headlines. Young bride killed on honeymoon. And when I dared to look out of the lorry window, the men were surrounding Willie, and they had recognised him. They had served under him all those years before. And this was a feu de joie, a welcome. So I breathed a sigh of relief. I must admit I've always enjoyed the Pathan sense of humour, which, as Willie once said, it's a bit crude, you know.
There's a sort of a standard story that goes all over the area of this group of tribesmen who had a pir, a holy man, as a visitor, and he scolded them for not having religious training and a shrine where they could pray and so on. So supposedly they killed him and buried him and made a grand shrine, and now they were as good Muslims as any. So my impression certainly was that few of them were deeply involved in theology or in Muslim scholarship.
Leader of the Tehrik-Taliban Pakistan, Baitullah Masood. In March 2009, the US announced $5 million for providing information leading to his arrest or conviction. Baitullah believes photography is un-Islamic. During this interview, he was covered up by one of his men from the cameras. The United States and the government of Pakistan have blamed Baitullah Masood for masterminding the assassination of Benazir Bhutto, the former Prime Minister of Pakistan.
अगर अमेरिका बराह रास्त आपसे बात करना चाहे तो आप लोग उसके लिए तैयार होंगे?
या अय्युहल्लज़ीना आमनु ला तत्तखिज़ुल यहूद वन नसरा औलिया बाज़ुहुम औलिया बाज़ वमन यतवल्लहुम मिनकुम फइन्नहुम मिनहुम. बात असली है कि यहूद नसरा हमारे ज़ाती दुश्मन है, जब ज़ाती दुश्मन है तो हम कैसे कहेंगे कि उनके साथ हम मुज़ाकरात करेंगे? वो तो काबिज़ है, इराक़ में काबिज़ है, फ़लस्तीन में काबिज़ है, अफ़गानिस्तान पे काबिज़ है। अक्सर मुसलमानों मुल्कों को उसने अपने कब्ज़े में लिया हुआ है। ये तो हमारे ज़ाती दुश्मन है, यहूद और नसारा अमरीकी। ये तो हमारे ज़ाती दुश्मन है, तो मुज़ाकरात की गुंजाइश तो बिल्कुल नहीं है। हम भी उनके पक्के दुश्मन हैं अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह।
अमीर साहब, बच्चियों के स्कूल के हवाले से आप क्या कहते हैं? दूसरी बात ये कि
मैंने कहा कि मुफ्तियों का काम ही है, मुफ्तियों से पूछो।
इस इलाके के अवाम के लिए इस्लाम से
I think this phase of Talibanization will pass as soon as the constant reinforcement of it disappears. And the reinforcement of it lies in Western military activities. The response of all Pashtuns is to resist powers that are imposed on them. And once they have established their own position of autonomy, then they can start creating new things by their own pattern, and that is what we need to encourage.
But it is not just the Western powers to leave the area. International forces of jihad like Al-Qaeda and their Arab sponsors from the Middle East must also go. It is the narrow Wahhabi ideology of the international forces of jihad that are engaged in elimination of the culture of Waziristan, because they view that the culture of Waziristan is not in line with their version of Islam. The US and NATO forces are not against the culture of Waziristan. People of Waziristan are afraid that even if the Western military forces leave the area, the Al-Qaeda will not leave Waziristan. Al-Qaeda and its local allies, the Taliban, will continue to eliminate the culture of Waziristan until they have made it a part of the history.
The tribesmen all said their prayers 5 times a day, and we just assumed that they would need to do that, and they were given time and space to do so. They were not fanatics at all, no. Well, I think the local tribesmen are intimidated by the Taliban, and they will do anything to have a quiet life if they can. But of course they are being stirred into action by the fanatical tribesmen.
I may even sound quite nostalgic when I talk about the way Pathan life has been, because it had a lot of good features, impressive features, and the Talibanization of that strikes me as very vulgar, very sort of demeaning and oppressive. And I am frightened by how irresponsibly most of the people act who are interfering with Pashtun lives. And I always say in relation to my Pashtun friends that you must stand up for what you are and make your adjustments in the modern world according to your standards and your judgments, and no one can tell you how you ought to do it.
Aşağı